So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Andrew Bailey and the BBC finally kind of discussing Brexit. It's a bit late in the day, isn't it, guys? Gals, it's a bit late. So this is the Mansion House speech. So this is the one of the big speeches that he'll do during the year.
Now, I've said many times as a public official, I take no position on Brexit per se, and that's very important. But I do have to point out consequences. The changing trading relationship with the EU has weighed on the level of potential supply. The impact on trade seems to be more in goods than services, which I don't think is particularly surprising. But it underlines...
With regard to services, some of it has changed, like the export of, I think it's mostly non-financial services. So day traders still have access to the City of London and things like that, and clearing houses. But when it comes to exporting of other kinds of services like exhibitions, that's where they run into really major problems.
Why we must be alert to and welcome opportunities to rebuild relations while respecting that very important decision of the...
So basically, he's not saying a lot here. Like, we need to address the problem, but no real solutions being offered. But you wouldn't expect that from Andrew Bailey as the governor of the Bank of England, anyways. But there's more kind of discussion around this.
There isn't, because I can pick up, because your leader has said he wants better relations with the EU. So can you tell me what it would look like? Imagine you've got them.
Yeah.
What do you do with the better relations?
Well, look, our prosperity and our security intertwine both Europe and the United States. When it comes to Europe, work for a close security relationship, as you saw last week. Keir was at the Armistice service within France, and more broadly, when the TCA is up again, to have better veterinary standards, aligning other standards as well.
It's up for review, but when you look at the stuff the EU are kind of talking to us about, it's more to do with implementation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which is something the UK hasn't done in full. The EU have also offered that kind of youth mobility scheme, which the UK hasn't taken up. And so even if, say, next year or the year after, we look at implementing things like veterinary agreements, it's going to take a while for those things to actually be implemented properly, and you're not going to get much growth off the back of that. Really, this should have been, if they wanted things like alignment, they should have started that now. But based on what we've read previously, Starmer wants equivalency, and the EU have ruled that out, because the fact that we are in not trade opposition, but we are in competition with the EU, and so the EU didn't want to grant us equivalency.
Have that closer trading relationship. And the other side we should not forget are the other things Rachel was talking about, the Chancellor, to get more investment in this country.
Right.
We have the lowest investment rate in the G7.
The irony of these kind of statements is that the Labour government have looked at deregulating in certain areas of agriculture, which again will take us away from the EU, and so what that means is trade will be more difficult. It's crazy behaviour.
Do you remember back when bankers were public enemy number one?
So for this one, Rachel Reeves is talking about deregulating of the financial sector. So what that means is, again, that takes us further away from the EU, and what that means is it makes trade in services more difficult, and it also, I think, it gives the EU more incentive for them to take away the financial services that they use within the UK, take them out of the UK, and put them into another EU kind of country.
Fred the Shreds, bankers' bonuses, the Wolf of Wall Street. Bankers were the epitome of everything wrong with our economy and society. If you worked in a bank from 2008 to 2015, you're probably pretending at dinner parties that you worked in a more popular profession. Car salesman, maybe a journalist.
Don't think journalists were that popular, pal.
That era, though, it seems, has now gone. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is making a speech tonight at Mansion House. Well, she'll say regulation went too far in the wake of the financial crash.
This is a separate video that we'll discuss probably the day after this one comes out. But the point being is the UK took a leading role in Solvency II regulation regarding kind of financial rules and things like that. So if we're looking to deregulate from that, again, I don't see how that brings us closer to the EU, which is what Andrew Bailey wants. It doesn't make any sense.
Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, says with the EU.
Now,
we've covered all of this. This is the speech that we've already looked at.
But what's he up to?
So the context here, this is the Mansion House speech, really important strategic speech to the financial community from the Chancellor and from the Governor of the Bank of England. And when I've asked the Governor of the Bank of England about Brexit, always diplomatic, often quite shy to talk about it, not so much there in terms of the impact economically. I think he would argue he was just making a statement of economic reality and no sort of political intervention. But I was very struck by those words, welcome opportunities to rebuild UK-EU relations and be alert for them too, suggesting that there could be more ambition, particularly for a government that's seeking any lever for economic growth. And the context here is, of course, that everybody in that room, all the financiers, will be thinking about Donald Trump and his potential trade war and tariffs, and the idea that the United Kingdom, although it doesn't want to have to make a choice, might have to make a choice between the stated government priority, which is a closer relationship with...
I do wonder, does Donald Trump know that the UK is no longer in the EU anymore? Or would he say something like, I want to put sanctions on Europe, for example? And, you know, with Andrew Bailey, kind of Faisal Islam pointing out, you know, the alertness bit, you know, the EU have kind of set out some of the stuff that they want, which is the mobility thing and the implementation of the TCA in full. Now, the question is, does anyone actually know what the Labour Party want from the EU in terms of improving trading relations and things like that? I don't know.
The European Union, or trying to get close to Donald Trump to stop these tariffs applying to the UK.
Yeah. Chris, Rachel Reeves was there as well, which is interesting in itself.
Yeah, so she was giving her annual speech at this same event, speaking in the last half hour. With economic growth, the central mission, as the government describes it, that it's attempting to deliver on, with this dilemma coming and potentially a big choice coming on that relationship with Brussels and a relationship with Washington and how you attempt to square both of those. Here's what she had to say about that.
I look forward to working closely with President-elect Trump and his team to strengthen our relationship in the years ahead. And of course, our biggest trading partner is the European Union. We will not be reversing Brexit or re-entering the single market or customs union.
And just like that, FPPE heart's broken.
But we must reset our relationship.
It feels like we're walking around in circles with some of this stuff, right? Because, you know, I really want to know specifically what they want to do. They keep talking about a reset. You know, you got Starmer going to meet various different EU leaders and such. But what do you actually want? And I can imagine why the EU would be frustrated to an extent by, you know, the Labour government, because it's not clear what they actually want.
Now, we've heard repeatedly, haven't we, and it's worth emphasising that for lots of people, Brexit was not purely about economics. It was about culture, it was about sovereignty, it was about taking control. And there you have the Chancellor sticking to the plan, the promise that the UK won't re-enter the big economic constructs of the European Union, but wants this so-called reset. But what can that actually amount to, and how big a contribution can it make towards economic growth? Then, how might the EU respond to any tariffs, import taxes that are imposed by the incoming Trump administration?
This is a real crossroads potentially for the UK, and a real challenge for states. What's it called? Statecraft. I can't remember the exact term for it. In terms of navigating a situation where the US will most likely put tariffs on goods coming from the UK, and so it's up to the UK to kind of figure out, you know, what do we do in that situation? Because I don't think Donald Trump will know the difference. I mean, he put steel tariffs on us when I think we had, I can't remember if we were a member of the EU or not. So I don't think he cares that much, to be honest.
And how does the UK respond to that? And you come back to that dilemma again. Do you look towards your nearest neighbours geographically, or towards America, where you have closest trading partners in Europe, but as far as financial services is concerned,
it doesn't, you know, you'd obviously be looking to Europe, you know, step up Brexit, reset, or European allies will lose patience, Starmer warned. So call comes after Andrew Bailey's warning. So, you know, I think they are kind of losing patience a bit with us. And we'll have to wait and see, you know, what that TCA review looks like. So here we've got Alistair Campbell.
And when you look, yes, America is a hugely important partner. When you look at the both trade import and export, the European Union remains our most important trading partner. We have fundamentally damaged that relationship through Brexit, through the bad deal that was done by Boris Johnson, and through the failure of politics generally to address what remains a huge drag on our economy. That much was clear from the OBR report yet again this year. It gets next to no coverage. I think it was good of Andrew Bailey finally to come out and say what we all know: Brexit has really damaged trade. But I was disappointed by the fact that Rachel Reeves everybody's acknowledging the problem, but not actually addressing it. So
I do think when it comes to Rachel Reeves, and I saw some polling regarding Vet Cooper, that Reform will potentially win her seat. I wonder if they're not Brexit-y enough for like the Reform lot, and they're not rejoin enough for the kind of Lib Dems and Green voters. And I think that could be one of the big problems they face in the next few years.
So I think we've just got to, not be bullied, not be intimidated, not be pushed around by America. We have to maintain good relations with both.
So it could be the case that the US wants to, drag us into their orbit and threaten sanctions or tariffs, I guess. When it comes to, Reeves and the Labour Party, they are disappointing in this respect, because I don't think they know what they want. And O'Brien talks about, the EU stuff as well.
Maximise the performance of our economy, to make the financial health of this country as robust as it can possibly be. So why does he still think he has to be neutral on the biggest issue of our time? The governor of the Bank of England is still frightened of the Daily Mail. The governor of the Bank of England is still frightened of the Daily Telegraph. So,
and I think that goes beyond just the governor of the Bank of England. I think that goes for the Labour Party as well, to an extent. I think they might fear the Brexiteer kind of lot, because don't forget, there are, Labour MPs in kind of pro-Brexit seats. It's not just Cooper, it's Nandy and quite a few others as well.
So he nibbles at the edges of the truth, but insists that he cannot say it out loud because he doesn't want to be on the front page of a mass-selling newspaper, essentially being treated like a judge in 1930s Germany, or indeed a judge in 2016 by Paul Dacre. Enemies of the people, crush the saboteurs. Hey, you can have some sympathy for him in that position, but someone's going to have to grow a pair soon in that kind of job. I take no position on Brexit, but...
I mean, surely you'd expect the Labour Party to do that, really. They're the politicians. They're the ones that are paid to take political positions on things. And, Reeves talking to the city regulator to encourage more risk-taking in the financial sector. Are we forgetting about how badly the economy got smoked back in 08? Like, the financial crash was the end of that era of the Labour Party. It did generational levels of damage to them. And here we go back again. Why? Because the economy is completely flatlined. Regulations are meant to protect consumers, not stand in their way. A race to the bottom in scandal-ridden city with record of financial crimes. A complete disaster. Here you have Annette Diddett, who she was pretty cool during the last few years covering kind of Brexit stuff. I think she's one of she works for a German outlet, saying it's November 24 and I'm listening for the first time ever to BBC Today talking about the damage Brexit has done to Britain. I mean, it's only been 8 years, which is true. It's only been 8 years, so at least we're getting somewhere, I guess. I don't know what to say about it. It's kind of embarrassing. The fact that foreign media outlets have done such a much better job than domestic media outlets is kind of crazy to me. Like, I just, there is such a rot within the British kind of media. It's unreal, absolutely unreal, to the point where they can scare politicians into not being able to point out the obvious, which is obviously we need a reset with the EU and we need to get more positive trading relations done. I don't see why we wouldn't go for a dynamic alignment deal, considering that in certain areas our food standards go higher than the base EU standards because the EU set the floor for the standards. So in some areas UK farming actually went above that. So again, I don't see why there's such a fear around dynamic alignment. I guess the Brexiteers will argue, our rules are being made elsewhere and stuff like that. That's the only thing. But again, that'll be the media kind of feeding into that narrative, when the fact is, our standards are higher regardless anyways. So it's not going to make that much of a difference. It's just baffling. But you can see why the UK is in such a mess. To be honest, when we finally got the major media outlet in this country, discussing Brexit in a more serious way. Instead of having this nonsense 50-50, which they normally have, you've got essentially one of the BBC's big hitters here in Faisal Islam actually discussing the situation, which is good, but it's very late, very very late. And then a lot of the blame's going to go on the party that didn't even leave the EU. The blame is going to go to the party that didn't really want this to happen. It's crazy to me. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.